The parking lot of Miller's Grocery smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet. 32 motorcycles sat in 3 crooked rows, chrome catching the gray afternoon light, engines still ticking as they cooled. The Iron Reapers had just finished their spring charity ride, 400 miles, every mile raising money for the children's hospital 2 towns over. They were tired. They were loud. They were, by every outward measure, exactly the kind of men and women a small, quiet child should have crossed the street to avoid. She didn't cross the street. She was maybe 8 years old, though she carried herself like someone twice that age, the careful walk of a kid who'd learned to move through a room without being noticed. Her backpack was 2 sizes too big, the zipper held shut with a twist tie. Her sneakers had a hole starting at the left big toe, and beneath her overgrown bangs, fatting from purple to a sickly yellow-green, was a bruise circling her eye. She walked straight past the vending machines, past the shopping carts, past 6 leather-clad strangers who could have snapped a phone book in half, and stopped in front of the biggest one. He had a gray beard down to his chest and forearms like fence posts, his vest read President. Everyone in that lot, without needing to be told, understood he was the one you went to. She looked up at him with the kind of stillness that makes adults stop what they're doing. "Can one of you pretend to be my dad?" she asked. "Just for 5 minutes." Nobody moved. "I just need someone to walk me inside," she said, quieter now, like she was afraid the offer might get taken back. "So the manager doesn't call anybody, please." What happened after those 7 words is not the story you think it is. Because by the time the sun rose the next morning, 32 motorcycles would be idling outside Kensington Elementary School, and the reason had nothing to do with the black eye at all. A word before we go further: courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sounds exactly like this, a scared child asking the hardest question she will ever ask a stranger. Keep that in mind. It matters later. Her name was Junie. Junebug, if you asked her stuffed rabbit, which had lost one ear in a move she wouldn't talk about. She was small for 8, sharp-tongued when she felt safe, and had a habit nobody around her had noticed yet. She counted exits. Every room she walked into, her eyes swept the corners first, door, window, door, before she ever looked at the people in it. She'd done it in the grocery store. She was doing it now in the parking lot, even as she waited for an answer. The big man crouched down to her eye level. Up close, his face was less frightening and more tired, the tiredness of someone who'd seen a great deal and forgotten none of it. "I'm Duke," he said. "Folks call me preacher, though I promise I'm no good at sermons." He didn't touch her. He didn't reach for the bruise, didn't ask about it, didn't do any of the things that would have made her bolt. "Who am I walking in with?" "Junie," she said. "And you don't have to be my actual dad, just like a dad-shaped person for the manager. He gets weird if kids come in alone too many times." Something about the phrase "too many times" landed on Duke like a dropped anvil, though his face didn't show it. He offered his arm, and she took it, not warmly, not the way a child takes a parent's hand, but the practiced way a person takes hold of something that might, this once, hold her up. Behind them, the other Reapers exchanged looks that needed no translation. A woman near the back of the group, silver-streaked braid, motorcycle boots, a patch reading doc, was already pulling out her phone not to film but to text someone. "Eyes on a kid. Might need you." The joker of the group, a wiry man everyone called Squirrel, tried to lighten the mood the way he always did. "Well, preacher's finally a father. Somebody get this man a minivan." Nobody laughed. Not because it wasn't funny, Squirrel's jokes usually were, but because everyone in that lot had clocked the same 3 things Junie had spent her whole short life learning to hide. The bruise wasn't new. It was healing over an older one. Her sleeves, despite the warm April afternoon, were pulled all the way down. And when Duke's shadow moved too quickly beside her, she flinched, just for a heartbeat, like her body remembered something her mouth hadn't said yet. Inside the store, the manager, a nervous, thin man named Elton who'd called the police on Junie twice before for loitering, a charge that mostly meant existing without an adult in view, looked up, opened his mouth, and closed it again at the sight of 32 leather vests filing in behind one small girl. "She's with us," Duke said simply, and that was the end of it. Junie bought a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and after a long, calculating look at the candy aisle, nothing else, putting back a chocolate bar she clearly wanted with the practiced discipline of someone budgeting money that wasn't really hers to spend. Doc noticed that too. "Get the chocolate," Doc said, sliding it back onto the counter. "On me. Every kid needs one thing that isn't groceries." Junie stared at her like she'd offered to buy the whole store. "Why?" "Because you asked a scary biker to be your dad for 5 minutes instead of asking him for money," Doc said. "That takes a kind of nerve I don't see a lot of, even in grown adults. Chocolate's the least the world owes you today." For the first time since the parking lot, Junie almost smiled. "Quick confession. I don't care how tough somebody looks. If a little kid asks a stranger to be their dad for 5 minutes, most of us are already fighting back tears. That parking lot went quiet for a reason." What was meant to be a 5-minute favor turned into an afternoon nobody planned. Junie's house, it turned out, was 7 blocks away, and when Duke offered to walk her home, she went very still and said, in the flattest voice a child can manage, "I have somewhere else to be first." That somewhere else was the public library, where, as the Reapers discovered, trailing behind her like a very strange parade, Junie spent most weekday afternoons until the branch closed. Not doing homework, reading everything she could reach about veterinary medicine, because she had decided, with the total conviction only an 8-year-old possesses, that she was going to be an animal doctor who also flew airplanes. "Planes and horses don't usually mix," Squirrel pointed out. "That's why I'm the one who's going to figure it out," Junie said, without looking up from her book. The bikers, to their own visible surprise, stayed. They filled 3 tables at the back of the library, 32 grown adults in leather, reading picture books upside down to make her laugh, arguing in hushed voices about horse anatomy. One of them, the group's mechanic, a broad-shouldered woman called Wrench, sketching a working diagram of a jet-powered saddle just to see Junie's face light up. It was, by any measure, a ridiculous scene, and it was also the first time in longer than she could remember that Junie had laughed without immediately checking over her shoulder to see who'd heard. Somewhere in that afternoon, between a terrible dad joke from a man named Pop, why did the biker bring a ladder to the bar? He heard the drinks were on the house, and a very serious debate about whether cats could technically ride motorcycles, Duke asked her, carefully, the way you'd ask a question you already suspected you didn't want the answer to. "Junie, who's home right now?" She went quiet again. The exit-counting eyes came back. "Mom works nights," she said. "Gary's home." "Gary, your dad?" "Gary's mom's boyfriend." A pause. "He doesn't like when I ask questions or leave lights on or when I'm loud." Or, she stopped herself, the sentence swallowed whole, and picked the book back up like it had never left her hands. Duke didn't push. He'd learned, somewhere in a childhood he rarely spoke about, exactly how much a scared kid can hold before the whole thing cracks open, and he knew better than to be the one who cracked it. Instead, he did something quieter. He caught Doc's eye across the table, and Doc gave a small nod, already reaching for her phone again. Because Doc wasn't just the club's medic. Before the leather vest, she'd spent 11 years as an ER nurse, and she knew exactly what a healing bruise looked like layered on top of an older one. She also knew exactly which number to call, not the police, not yet, but a woman named Sandra Cole, a family advocate the club had worked with twice before, quietly, the way real help usually happens. Here's something worth sitting with. How many people walked past Junie that week without noticing the bruise? We're all so busy looking ahead of us that we miss the person quietly asking for help right beside us. It's not a biker story. It's a paying attention story. It was Squirrel, of all people, who found it. While walking Junie back toward the library counter to return her books, he spotted a battered spiral notebook sticking half out of her backpack, the twist-tied zipper unable to hold it fully closed. A single word was scrawled on the cover in a child's careful handwriting. RULES. Not homework rules, not a game. Rule 4, don't cry where he can hear you. Rule 7, if the TV is loud, stay in your room. Rule 9, tell mom everything is fine, even when it isn't, because if you don't, things get worse for both of you. Squirrel didn't read it aloud. He didn't need to. He closed the notebook, tucked it gently back exactly where he'd found it, and walked back to the group with a face that had lost every ounce of its usual joke. He handed Duke a single word, low enough that Junie, 3 tables away, couldn't hear it. "Preacher, we need to move on this, tonight." At the same time, across town, Junie's second-grade teacher, a soft-spoken woman named Ms. Alvarez who had spent 6 months quietly documenting absences, wince reactions, and one deeply troubling essay titled My Home, that Junie had turned in blank except for a single drawing of a closed door, was on the phone with the same advocate Doc had called an hour earlier. 2 threads pulling toward the same knot, without either side knowing the other had started pulling. If stories like this move you, the quiet ones, where the real heroism is noticing, that's exactly the kind of story we tell here. Stick around, because it's about to get a lot more complicated before it gets better. Doc's call with Sandra Cole lasted 11 minutes. What came out of it was simple, legal, and entirely unglamorous. A welfare check, filed properly, through the right channels, with Ms. Alvarez's documented concerns attached and Doc's observations logged as a mandated reporting adjacent witness statement. No bikers showed up at Junie's front door that night. No dramatic confrontation, no fists, no vigilante justice, because Duke, more than anyone in that clubhouse, understood something the internet often gets wrong about men like him. The fastest way to lose a child forever is to turn her rescue into a spectacle that gets you arrested and her sent somewhere worse. Instead, they waited, which, if you've never had to do it, is its own kind of unbearable. At 9:40 that night, a caseworker and a police officer arrived at Junie's house for what looked, from the street, like a routine visit. What they found through a conversation with Junie's exhausted, frightened mother, who broke down within minutes of being asked gently, privately, whether everything at home was truly fine, confirmed enough to place Gary under investigation, and Junie, temporarily, into her grandmother's care 3 streets over. Junie's mother wasn't a villain in this story. She was a woman working 60-hour weeks, terrified of losing the only help with rent she had, who had convinced herself the yelling was just Gary's temper and the bruises were accidents, because the alternative was a truth too heavy to carry alone. When the caseworker asked her, quietly, what she needed, she put her face in her hands and said the truest thing she'd said in months. "I needed somebody to ask me that a long time ago." Not every villain in a story like this is a monster you can point a finger at from a safe distance. Sometimes the hardest truth is that fear and love and survival get tangled together until nobody can see straight. That doesn't make it okay. It makes it human, and it makes the people who finally ask the question the real heroes of the night. The next morning, Junie walked into Kensington Elementary the way she always did, head down, exits counted, waiting for the day to end so she could disappear back into a library book. She had no idea her grandmother had called Doc at 6 a.m. She had no idea that Ms. Alvarez had spent half the night on the phone with the school principal. She had no idea until she heard it that a school morning could sound like this. 32 engines, arriving together, low and steady, filling the front circle of the school in 3 neat rows exactly like the grocery store parking lot 2 days before. No shouting, no revving for show, just presence. 32 adults in leather standing quietly at the edge of the drop-off lane, hands folded, waiting. Students pressed against classroom windows. Teachers stood frozen mid-sentence. The principal, a cautious man named Mr. Fenwick, hurried outside already rehearsing a phone call to the district office, until he saw who was leading the group. Duke stepped forward, hands visibly empty, voice calm. "We're not here to cause a problem," he said. "We're here because a little girl in your school asked a stranger to pretend to be her dad for 5 minutes. Because she didn't have anyone she trusted to ask for real. We'd like that to never be true again for her or for anyone else here." He held up a folder. Inside it, a donation arranged overnight through the club's charity fund to establish a permanent counselor position at Kensington, one whose entire job was simply to notice. To ask the question Ms. Alvarez had asked. To be, for kids who needed it, the person who looks twice. Junie, frozen on the front steps in her too big backpack, stared at 32 familiar faces lined up outside her school like the world's strangest honor guard. Doc broke from the line first, crouched down, and held out the chocolate bar Junie had put back the day before. A second one this time, no strings attached. "Told you," Doc said. "The world owed you one good thing. Turns out it owed you 32. You knew this moment was coming. But here's the part worth sitting with. It isn't the bikes that matter. It's that 32 adults heard a scared kid and decided her fear was worth rearranging their entire morning for. If this hit you the way it hit us, tell us in the comments, what's one act of kindness from a stranger you've never forgotten?" Gary was formally charged 3 weeks later, following a full investigation that confirmed what the notebook, the bruises, and Junie's mother's testimony had already made clear. Junie's mother, given real support instead of judgment, counseling, a housing assistance program the club helped connect her to, and a standing invitation to the Reapers' monthly cookout, slowly rebuilt a life sturdy enough to hold her daughter again. Junie moved back home 4 months later, not because everything was magically fixed, but because it was finally, genuinely safe, checked, rechecked, and watched over by people who had decided to keep watching. The rules notebook stayed in a drawer for a long time. Eventually, Junie added a new page to it, in the same careful handwriting. Rule 1, you're allowed to ask for help. Rule 2, the scary-looking ones are sometimes the safest. Rule 3, family doesn't always start with blood. Sometimes it starts in a parking lot. Duke never did become her actual dad, not on paper. He didn't need to. Every Sunday, without fail, 32 motorcycles, sometimes 20, sometimes 40, the number never mattered, rolled past her grandmother's street on their way to the weekly ride, and Junie stood on the porch and waved until the last engine faded around the corner. She still counts exits when she walks into a room. Some habits take longer to unlearn than others. But now, when she counts them, she also counts something else. The number of people in that room who would show up for her without being asked twice. Lately, that number keeps growing. If this story reminded you that family isn't always about blood, that sometimes it's built by the people who simply choose to show up, share it with someone who needs that reminder today. And if you believe courage can look like 32 motorcycles idling quietly outside a school, or like one small girl brave enough to ask a stranger for 5 minutes of safety, you already know exactly what kind of stories we tell here. We've got more of them coming.